Smooth 98.1 here. We are 7:30 gone past for a feel good Friday. I actually forget sometimes that it's a Friday. Well, yes. So for a Friday morning, this is Freshly Pressed on Smooth Breakfast. I'm Sope Martins. We are streaming live already up on youtube.com/smooth 981 FM Lagos. Go over there, watch what happens behind the scenes. And of course, join me in welcoming Ikemesit Effiong. He is at Judge Ike up on social media. Hi, Ikemesit. Good morning.
Hey, morning, Shopper, morning, Lagos. I'm great. Feeling this Friday. Really feeling it. How are you?
Loving that. Wonderful. Thank you. I'm liking the energy. Long may it continue into the news analysis. Huh? Hopefully the stories will
Well,
not. So sorry, I
welcome.
brought you down already.
We'll try.
Let's raise you up again. All right, people, join this conversation. We want you to share your thoughts up on youtube.com/smooth 981 FM Lagos. The comment section is free for all to join and have their opinions shared. So all you need to do, leave that comment on the live stream and I'll read it out over the course of the show. I'll also be reading out your messages on WhatsApp on 0809 440 981 and on Twitter as well. Hashtag freshly pressed 981 and tag us at smooth 981 FM. All right, so it comes to lots to discuss today. First of all, let's just give out some information because it looks like Monday is going to be a public holiday. This one came in from the Daily Post. Federal government declares Monday public holiday. This is the 10th of October, and it was in a statement issued by the Minister of Interior, Rafa Agrigbeshola, who said that the holiday is to mark this year's Eid el-Malid celebration in commemoration of the birth of the Holy Prophet Muhammad. So, yeah, congratulations, everyone. We've got a holiday, and it's in celebration.
That's probably why I'm excited. Is all I'm with.
Probably because you've got a long weekend. Yeah.
The second long weekend in a row.
Yes. Less exciting for me because it's the second long weekend I get to watch you guys enjoying life without me as I keep you.
We can't relate.
I know you can't. Moving on. All right, so let's take a look at this story. It comes in from the Nation 2023 budget. Reps okay 8.437 trillion naira new borrowing plan. The dreaded word that nobody likes to hear anymore in Nigeria, borrowing, because we've come to associate bad things with it. But let's take a look at this. So this was yesterday. The House of Representatives approved a new borrowing plan that's supposed to enable the government to borrow about 8.437 trillion naira from foreign and domestic sources in order to finance the 2023 budget. An interesting bit. There's lots that comes in from this article, and I'll be asking for your opinion about that right now. But I also just wanted to highlight this, that they also approved the recommendation of its Committee on Finance that the cost of petroleum subsidy be capped at 1.7 trillion naira, which I thought was quite interesting given the figures that we had seen coming around for 2023, the half case scenario and the worst case scenario that we heard from the Minister of Finance. Ikemesit, over to you. I want to hear what you have to say about this new borrowing plan and also the capping of petroleum subsidy.
Right. Okay. So this so I mean, all of these numbers, and there are quite a bit of numbers to get through this, right? It came out of the proceedings of the House of Representatives Committee of Finance report, right? Basically, on next year's budget, the president is supposed to present a 19.76 trillion naira budget, and today actually, right, to a joint session of the National Assembly. And so the Senate has already gone through the numbers and approved and already given its thoughts on how he thinks that next year's spending will be. And this is the turn of the House of Representatives. So according to the House of Representatives, they want the fiscal deficit to come down from 11.3 trillion naira to 10.5 trillion naira. Basically the fiscal deficit just describes the financial figure that comes when you deduct all of the revenue. Exactly, or we have to make up. Yeah, so all of the revenue that you generated in a year minus all of the borrowing that you've made to actually meet up with your financial commitments constitutes the deficit. And the deficit has been growing year on year, pretty much for the last 5 years. So the House of Representatives wants that ceiling to come down to 10.5 trillion naira now, and it thinks that reduction would largely be accounted for by almost a trillion naira in savings from the subsidy regime. The actual number is 737 billion naira. Now, the House of Representatives thinking is that we would only pay the fuel subsidy for the first 6 months of 2023. And because we would not have to provision for extra subsidy spending for the remainder of the year, we should have we should be able to make almost more than 700 billion naira, right, in cost savings. The challenge with that plan is that plan was actually supposed to be a plan for this year, for 2022, right? And so heading into 2022, in December 2021, the finance minister, Zainab Ahmed, had said that we would only have the subsidy for the first 6 months of the year. At the time, the government was negotiating with the IMF, right, to get a bridging credit facility so that it could meet up with some emergency spending requirements, including at the time, if I recall, procuring vaccines to help the country manage the COVID-19 pandemic, right, within the country. Fast forward to January, and basically the government and the finance ministry said that it was not going to be sustainable, right, capping the subsidy and capping subsidy spending for only the first 6 months of the year. And so basically we are going to pay for the subsidy for, the rest of the year. So this seems like a rinse and repeat, right?
Well, hold on though, same old plan, but in a new situation, wouldn't you say?
I know that. Yes, so I was going to mention that 2023 is different because, by May 29, this administration will be out, and we would have a new administration who would inherit a lot of the spending commitments and priorities. And so sort of Aso Rock is playing this delicate balancing game where it wants to ensure that it's not leaving a lot of extant or excessive, right, spending priorities for the new administration. My argument would be that if the subsidy payment regime is going to cross over into 2023, I don't see how those who are benefiting from the current scheme will, right, deal with the unwinding of that regime, sort of like halfway through next year, especially since all of the structural and the systemic things we're supposed to do on the reform side to disincentivize, right, the payment of your subsidies we're not doing yet. So there's that.
I'm just hoping sooner or later Cameroon will have to get their refinery running so that petrol doesn't go over. I'm just saying, moving along.
Precisely.
More messages. Let your messages come in up on WhatsApp on 0809 440 981. I'll be reading them out in just a bit. Now, let's take a look at this next story that comes in from this day newspaper. Fuel scarcity worsens in Abuja as NMDPRA blames Kogi flood for supply disruption. And the fuel queues kept growing longer in Abuja, with motorists spending long man hours in queues to get the product, which has had its supply disrupted on and off since the beginning of this year. But this time around, we have heard from the regulatory authority, who in an advisory blamed massive flooding in Lokoja for the disruption in supply, saying this is not at all about a lack of supply. It's just about a lack of getting the supply over to the right places. I mean, Ikemesit, what would you say to this?
Well, that's what they are saying. And so I should say, first and foremost, Nigeria is in the throes of a very extensive flooding problem. Almost all of central Nigeria is dealing with significant levels of flooding. I think the National Hydrological, either regulatory or management agency, right, as well as the Nigerian Meteorological Agency, I've said something like 27 Nigerian states are dealing with some level of flooding. It's been, and Lagos residents will probably notice this too, it's been an unusually wet rainy season, especially compared to previous years. And this is part of sort of.
But also, it's something that we are going to see a lot more of going as the years continue. Because we have seen worldwide weather patterns. The rains are getting rainier. The sunshine parts are getting sunnier. The weather is becoming more extreme. So what are we going to do about it? But sorry, that's an aside. Moving back to you.
Yeah, sure. Certainly the unpredictability of weather patterns, right, which which has been brought on by the onset of climate change, right, is a real issue. We actually just released the report, SBM, I think earlier this week, either on Monday or on Tuesday, right, talking about the global situation with floods, food security, national security, and really what's just going on around the world. I think something like 32 or 33 countries have had major flooding incidents this year alone, right across all of the six rather inhabited continents of the world. So this is clearly not a local issue, right? And this is clearly part of the global trend. But to Abuja and the fuel scarcity, while this is sort of the latest trigger point for some measure of panic buying as well as some disruption to the supply situation of fuel in the federal capital, it's worth noting, and I've actually these days I divide my time between Lagos and Abuja, so this is something that I've seen up close and personal.
Okay.
Abuja has been in the throes of a fuel security situation for large parts of this year as well as last year, right? Yeah. So whether it's the security situation in parts of Niger, Nasarawa State, the ongoing tit for tat, that's sort of frozen right now, but is waiting for another trigger point, right? In order to resurrect it between the PPPRA, right, and other fuel marketers and distributors and the federal governments over, payments. So we're back to, our conversation around, subsidies and subsidizing fuel consumption. Abuja's, in a way that listeners here in Lagos probably might not understand and appreciate, because that hasn't been the case in Lagos. But Abuja has actually had long bouts of fuel queues and fuel scarcity.
They've had a tough time of it for a while now.
Indeed, yeah, over the course of the last 2 years. So if anything, ample fuel supply in the market this year has been the exception rather than the rule, right, within the federal capital territory. And it just so happens that, the heavy precipitation that we've seen of late has cut off particularly the Abuja-Lokoja expressway artery, which is the main artery through which fuel tankers supply, filling stations within the nation's capital. Alternative routes are already being considered, but it's worth noting that every state that surrounds the FCT has had some major flooding incidents, right, this year, right? Nasarawa, Kaduna, Niger as well. And so there's something to be said about whether those alternative, logistical arrangements might not be impacted by ongoing weather.
Now, moving away from the fuel scarcity and just focusing on the flooding, 27, that's the majority of the states in Nigeria. So what's being done about, what do you see being done about it? What do you want to see being done about it? What can we do about it? Because that cannot be good for, first of all, the people, second of all, the country and the economy. What do you do? How do you carry about your daily business in flooding? I remember seeing this like a report in which a man had his house was half in the water, and that was how he slept, how he woke up, how he went through the day, submerged in water. And this is something that you can now extrapolate to how many millions of people having to live that way. What do we do about that?
Not to also talk about the associated cost in terms of lost crop yields and an insufficient second harvest season. A lot of these states, right, are Nigeria's prime food growing regions. And so if you think the inflation picture, right, if you think the inflation picture right now is murky and messy, we're getting up to December when food prices traditionally inch up. With this, it is going to be significant. What needs to be done? So flooding is a lagging indicator, right, of things that should have been done, right, in the past. One other point I wanted to mention, both around fuel supply, but this also is relevant and applies to food security, is the paucity of storage capacity, right, for the things that we actually get to produce, right? And so, local storage capacity, I think I once saw numbers that said that we only have domestic storage capacity for, I think, 8 or 9 days of fuel, right, in the entire country, right? So we constantly need to import and continue to get, transport and logistical nodes moving. If not, we're
Excuse
literally
me, I'm sorry.
a week
You
and a
can't.
couple of days away, right, from scarcity. The problem is even worse with food, right? And so you have a situation where we need to invest a lot more in storage infrastructure so that when the proverbial now actual rainy day shows up, we're able to, we're better prepared, right, to counter these measures, right? Yeah.
People. So the assignment was a feel good Friday, but I'm gonna do this to you. The next story
You
comes in
told the
from the
stories.
Punch.
You told us the stories.
Nigerians living in abject poverty. That's what the Christian Association of Nigeria in the 19 northern states and Abuja said yesterday, saying that Nigerians are living in hell as a result of the weak economy under the current administration. Is that something you would disagree with, or something that you say needs a little more nuance?
The data does show that absolute poverty is rising in Nigeria. The number of Nigerians who are classified as food insecure, I think I've mentioned this on the previous episode of Freshly Pressed, is supposed to increase by about 10 million Nigerians. And this is due to a combination of a host of factors. The war in Ukraine affecting wheat and other food imports, supply countries, right? That we import food from. The security picture we've talked about, the situation with respect to agriculture, the fact that most of our agriculture is still subsistence based, and coupled with the fact that we have a challenging and still involving, right, climate picture, of course, impacting on food security. But the insecurity is sort of the main prick point, right, with respect to this. And this is impacting the ability of food-growing Nigerian families to put food both on their table as well as on the table of other Nigerians who are to purchase these commodities. This obviously means many Nigerians have been displaced from their homes. I was recently at a colloquium on security. I think an expert said there are at least 6 Nigerian states that host at least 100,000 internally displaced persons. So that is almost at the minimum 600,000 to 700,000 Nigerians, right, are not currently living in their homes. And this is spread, right, over a significant expanse of Nigerian territory. When you combine all of these things together, obviously the weak picture with respect to government revenue and how it's impacting its ability to provide essential social services, as it were, the unemployment picture which keeps rising and all of that. Associations like CAN, right, tend to be very absolutist in terms of their assessment of the country. But I think that with respect to this particular situation, it's hard to see what's the word now? I'm looking for the right word for Friday morning radio. And it's hard to see the paranoia or absolutism, really. The data just simply corroborates their perspective.
Like now, Ikemesit, you've highlighted in your analysis insecurity being the major contributing or causal factor for this, but then we hear from the president, from Mr. President, and I'll take this story from the Vanguard newspaper and just join it to this talk of poverty, where he says that insecurity evolved and assumed other dimensions. So even though his administration recorded successes in the war against insecurity, that the challenges have evolved and assumed these other directions in some other dimensions rather in some areas, and that he's gone ahead and instructed service chiefs to replicate the successes that they had previously recorded in the fight against terrorism in the Northeast and in other parts of the country as well. I mean, is that a fair assumption for us to make, that listen, we saw this administration out of the gates really kind of going hard against terrorists in the Northeast, but then somehow where did it all go wrong? Why are we now seeing, even though we've been told that insecurity is not that bad, but everybody feels some measure of, they feel the hand of insecurity in whatever form or dimension it's taking within the different geopolitical zones on their shoulder, tapping at their shoulder all the time. So how do we how do you respond? How would you respond to this, that insecurity has evolved and assumed other dimensions?
Okay, so this is not something that I say often, but the president is right. Insecurity has evolved in terms of its geographic distribution, in terms of the nature, um, the nature and the approach, right? That various non-state actors who are its chief proponents, right, have utilized in order to keep up with the government's efforts in sort of tackling this. But this is sort of where my agreement with the president, right, ends, and I'll go back to more familiar territory. It is a chief responsibility of governments to protect and secure the lives and properties of Nigerians. That's primarily why they're in government. Every other thing turns on the fact that people are able to have a reasonable expectation that if they leave their homes to go make a living for themselves and their families, they can get home in one piece, right? And in that sense, being squarely fixated on the evolution of security doesn't exactly put the government in a very favorable light. It certainly doesn't mean that we would exculpate it from its very poor track record, right, of managing a security situation, because, government's priorities should evolve as the security or the economic or the political picture, right, continues to change. And in that sense, right, and the president did talk in his speech to the graduating, the passing out
Parade of 68 regular courses of the Nigerian Defense Academy.
Exactly. He did talk about some of the things that his administration has done and is doing, right, in order to meet up the picture. But fundamentally, right, if I was to summarize it, the breakdown and the relative non-utilization of the human intelligence capabilities, right, of the security services, and those are pretty extensive. The underinvestment in building community relations in impacted and affected communities, the relative lack of respect by the security authorities for human rights considerations, which means that the people who are supposed to be policed, the people who you are supposed to be acting on behalf of, right, have in a number of high-profile cases and in many other cases that are falling under the radar, being the victims of hard-handed police action. And the fact that for the longest time up until right about early last year, the government was doubling down on security mitigation strategies that did not make sense. And it's still doing, things in that light, right, which from a strategic standpoint, don't seem to match up with what the armed and terrorist groups are doing. All of these things have combined together, again paired with the relative lack of political will to pursue and contain emerging security threats early enough until they are snowballed almost out of proportions. You put all of these things together, and you see, you can see an alternative framework where, if the government had done better on a lot of these line items, the security situation would be in a much more improved state than it is now. So if this was the president sort of trying to establish some carte blanche or trying to buy himself, right, a certain measure of forgiveness when some of the historical record of this is being written, I think this was a relatively unsuccessful attempt.
Well, I do like to laud successes as well as look at failures. And there were successes that were made, and the fact that the president has said that he directed the service chiefs to replicate the successes is something that I'm looking forward to seeing. I mean, just because you're replicating successes does not mean that you have to replicate the means by which you got those successes, because different insecurity issues need different approaches and different solutions. So looking forward to when we can go about our daily lives in all parts of the country in a peaceful manner. All right, let's take some messages. I'll go over to WhatsApp. Dami from Ikeja says, the summary of the borrowing plan is simply to pass the buck to the next administration. As the Yoruba people will say, and I'll just read the English version of this, the debt is none of my business. All right, I'll take this next one. D from Alausa. Oh, thank you for the welcome back. Says, fantastic analysis. Well done. All right, let's take a look. Oh, remember, you can leave your comments up on youtube.com/smooth981FM Lagos, and I'll be back to reading messages in a bit. Let's take a look at this next article. It comes in from This Day newspaper, and we're going to talk about the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, an agency I particularly like, by the way, because I see them doing good work. But they have, the NDLEA has secured the court's order to extend the detention of billionaire arrested with 8.8 billion naira worth of tramadol. This was from the Federal High Court in Lagos, and this was to detain a Lagos-based billionaire, Nsofo Kennedy Ugochukwu, in its custody for a period of 14 days, pending the conclusion of their ongoing investigation. Ikemesit.
Yeah, so this was a somewhat high-profile drug bust at the end of September. The particular individual in question had his VGC home stormed, let's use the Nigerian journalistic parlance for it, by operatives of the NDLEA. 443 cartons, this is just to set the context, 443 cartons of tramadol, hydrochloride, which contained about 13.45 million pills of the drug, right? Were discovered and seized, and he had already burned some of those consignments. It's worth remembering, tramadol, while it is a controlled substance, and while you have seen a ramp up of efforts, right, to bust this importation and production and distribution rings right across the country. There was a very high profile one in Kano, I think 2 or 3 years ago, right, in that regard. And you're right, the NDLEA has deployed more robust measures to contain not just the distribution and importation of tramadol, but we also saw a high profile cocaine bust, right, at the airport here in Lagos. I think that was about last week or 2 weeks ago as well. What is clear is that Nigeria is increasingly reprising its role as a key transshipment point for illicit and controlled substances, which largely flow, but this is not by no means exclusive, which largely flow from South America, chiefly Brazil, onto Europe and the Middle East. And so you have a situation, we're mapping this in the office, and it's like, if you look at the rump, if you just whip up a map of the world, and if you look at the rump of Brazil, and you look at some of the well-known drug hotspots, right, drug originated hotspots, right, in Brazil, it is easy for you to fly a light aircraft on just one tank of fuel, right, from those parts of Brazil to places like Nigeria and other parts of West Africa, just because of its geographic proximity. And so that geographic proximity, the relative cultural affinity that comes with, the cultures of, Eastern South America as well as West Africa, has meant that for decades and decades, right, West Africa has served as a very useful funnel for drugs, right, transiting on to Europe and Asia from South America. And what authorities and agencies like the NDLEA are doing is ensuring that they put a lead and they find, a sustainable way of ensuring that the law enforcement framework here in Nigeria serves as a huge disincentive for a lot of these smugglers, so that, they find alternative means and they allow Nigerians to live in peace.
Yes. Go about your business. Go around us, not through us. All right. Real quick, I'll take this one from Sir Ken, who says, "Who is the beneficial owner of these drugs being discovered every day in Lagos?" Questions. I couldn't tell you. All right, so Ikemesit, thank you so much for joining me for today's Freshly Pressed. And of course, you can go catch the replay up on youtube.com/smooth981FM Lagos. And make sure you find Ikemesit and SPM Intelligence on Twitter. Ikemesit is at Judge IQ, direct you to all the reports that he mentions during his analysis.
SBM Intelligence is at SBM Intelligence.
Yeah. Simple. All right. Thanks, you. All right, thanks, Ikemesit. I shall see you next week.